I've been asked to talk about the theological, spiritual, indeed philosophical underpinnings of the Golden Gate project, which is a project very dear to my heart and the work of my Peace Studies Institute. I propose this from various perspectives, really. Firstly, as a peace scholar, as a peace studies expert, doing my best to find what my friend Brian Vision-Dance used to call social acupuncture points. Brian had this metaphor that as healers, planetary healers, we should be working with social acupuncture. That is, trying to find little places where we can get the energy of the planet circulating again. I think there's a lot of blocked energy around Golden Gate. The Gate of Mercy, as it's known in Judaism. It's the eastern wall of the old city of Jerusalem. And outside that gate, which was shut in the 16th century by orders of the Ottoman Sultan, are lots of graves. And there's a Muslim graveyard just the other side of that gate. Now, it's always been a prestige thing to be buried as near as possible to that gate, because the idea is that at the end of time, at the Last Judgment, according to strict Sunni Islam, the dead will rise out of those graves, and Muhammad and Jesus will come back in through that gate. Muslims accept Jesus as the Messiah. Christ is the Messiah by definition to Muslims. But he was supported and backed up by Muhammad. Muhammad's mission was necessary because the Byzantine Empire, although it had accepted Christianity, didn't understand the message, didn't get the point. So from the Islamic perspective, Muhammad came to complete the mission of Jesus, not to countermand it or destroy it, but to fulfill it. From an Islamic theological perspective, we're still in this kind of time of waiting for the parousia, the second coming, the reappearance of the Messiah, Jesus, but who will have Muhammad as his bodyguard, as his support, as his, we will leave to them working out who's in charge of which things on the day. And I think a Sunni Muslim, or a Shia actually, would agree with me on that. Now, from a Christian perspective, this is also expected. The understanding is that the Messiah will come in through that gate, indeed Christ returned. Christians believe in the second coming. It's a theological dogma of the church, actually. And the current Pope, Benedict XVI, has written about this. It's an aspect of fundamental Christian theology that both Protestant, Catholic and Orthodox all agree with. And it's interesting that particular gate was entered by Heraclius, who reconquered Jerusalem from the Zoroastrians just around the time Muhammad was beginning his mission, and he actually chose to come in that gate. So it has huge significance for the Muslim and Christian faith systems. For the Jews as well, it's enormously important. My understanding is that the Orthodox Jews of today believe that their Messiah, the Messiah, will come in through that gate and usher in a time of peace and justice. The fundamental thing for Judaism is that God is a God of justice. The prophets, the witnesses to righteousness in Judaism are constantly emphasizing God's judgment, but also God's mercy. Now, it's called the Gate of Mercy for Judaism. Mercy is chesed, which is one of the sephiroth of the Kabbalah. It balances judgment. All of us in our psyche have times when we err to mercy and sometimes too much mercy, too much compassion. We have to balance that with justice and judgment. I would imagine that the Orthodox Jew, the rabbi, would say that the planet's been going through too much justice, too much gevura energy, too much harsh sternness, too many wars, too much violence. That's the problem with the planet at the moment. And it's interesting from a Kabbalistic perspective, the angel Gabriel, who brought the message of Islam to Muhammad, the word Gabriel is related to the word gevura, which is the sephirot of sternness, judgment. And Islam certainly has that aspect of judgment to it. In its more extreme forms, it can be extremely judgmental. In the Jewish eye, and this is the cusp of the conflict between Judaism and Islam, that gate is a symbol of that in many ways. I think Judaism would love to reopen the Gate of Mercy in their own hearts. The Jewish nation is not a violent, cruel people, although sadly in the West Bank and their treatment of the Palestinians, they've been made to be that through the tragedies of victory, actually. The fact that they won the war that was waged against them when they declared independence. To get the Jewish nation back to being merciful, I think would be the very first thing their Messiah would want to do. Otherwise, it's not going to be the Messiah. And secondly, to do that for the whole planet. That gate symbolises the potential of moving the whole world to a new era. Now, in the Kabbalistic traditions of Isaac Luria, based at Safat, he applied the ideas of the Kabbalah to history as a whole. This is a notion of what I call transpersonal history, that history has certain spiritual meanings that unfold in epochs. And in the Lurianic Kabbalah, it's the understanding that we are in the time of Gevurah, but we're stuck at that. And we need to move into the time of Chesed, which is the compassion and love. So opening that gate, the gate of mercy, is a symbol that mankind is ready to move into that new era. So we have also a huge Jewish cemetery just beyond the Muslim cemetery, just outside the Golden Gate or the Gate of Mercy, which again, there are different factions and groups within Judaism now, just as there were in the time of Jesus, but most Jews, I think, believe in life after death. They believe in the survival of the soul. But I think very few Jews would literally think, people are going to come out of those graves. I think there's an understanding based on empirical research into the after-death state, near-death experiences and so on, that the soul long departs. These souls are not hovering about wanting to come through the gate. That's a metaphor, it's poetry. It's beautiful poetry, but it's still poetry. And I think there's a danger in too much literalism. If we surrender religious faith to the literalists and they colonise the planetary imagination, that freezes the ethical energy of mankind as a whole. I'm speaking now, to the mass of maybe non-religious people on the planet, or semi or post-religious. Peace is a problem for all of us, not just the religious people on the planet, certainly not the extreme religious people. They've hijacked the planetary imagination too much since the wars of Afghanistan, Iraq, 9/11, Bosnia. And what I'm arguing is that religion is too important to be left to the religious leaders, actually. It's a paradox here. That gate should be opened for all of humanity and all of mankind, because, okay, let's look at where the messianic idea comes from. It comes from Zoroastrianism, actually, the ancient Persian religion. Now, Zoroaster, one of the first prophets on the planet, 1750 BC probably, left us these hymns, the Gathas, and he talks about living for an era of peace and righteousness. He was a prophet of love and compassion. And he said there's a problem with the planet. The planet's being infiltrated by dark forces. He identified them as having a leader called Ahriman. And the job of us human beings is to oppose Ahriman, the devil, Satan, the anti-force that creates suffering and cruelty. Not death as such, because in Zoroastrianism, as in all religions, there's an acknowledgement of the human condition. But cruel, unjust, premature and violent death, is not part of the divine plan. So, anyway, Zoroaster came, brought his message, said, come on mankind, pursue the paths of peace and righteousness. I've been sent by Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Light. But he said that his mission wasn't complete, and that one day another person would come, and that person was known as the Seashant, which means the saviour, or the redeemer. And it's within Zoroastrian scriptures, very, very ancient, that you first find that concept of a redeemer who's going to come and save mankind. And what, according to Orthodox Zoroastrianism, will happen when the Seashant comes? He'll complete and finish the work of Zoroaster, and he will usher in a world of peace and plenty, and only evil will be condemned and removed from the planet. Now, how that's going to happen, that's the texts don't tell us, right? It takes place in terms of much bigger eschatological conflict between the forces of Ahriman and Ahura Mazda, which, according to Zoroaster, predate even this planet. This planet has come into being since that original war between the sons of light and dark began. And we're the front line of that combat now, according to Zoroastrianism. And the Seashant, you can think of him as like the intelligence chief of the forces of light. I'm recording this on St. Michael's Day, Michaelmas. It's also coming up to the eve of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. And St. Michael, in many ways, is the equivalent in Christianity of, the intelligence chief of the forces of light, who can redeem mankind. Although in Zoroastrianism the Seher will be an actual human being, and not, will incarnate as that. Okay, so those are some of the background. Now, Baha'is also believe in messianic work and tradition. They believe their founder, Baha'u'llah, in effect embodied that energy. And interestingly enough, the initiator of Baha'u'llah was called the Bab, which means the gate. And Baha'ism originates from a particular brand of theosophical and mystical Shi'ism in Iran, which was very, very wise and cosmopolitan in its perspective. And very central to that is the concept of the Bab, the gate. And the Bab is someone who is a gate between this world and the next world. It's the same metaphor as the papacy. The pontiff is the bridge between this world and the spiritual kingdoms. So the Bab performs that. And that's the origin of the word Bab Ilon, which means the gate of God. Bab Ilon. So the Bab brought to mankind Baha'u'llah, who brings the glory of God. And so that messianic work is also within the Bahai tradition. It's already commenced, and I'm sure the Baha'is theologically could appreciate and understand the idea of opening the Golden Gate. So theologically, the project is about opening the gate symbolically and ushering in, therefore, our willingness to welcome to the planet a messianic era. I'm suggesting we suspend and postpone theological discussions about who is or was the actual Messiah, right? Was it Christ? Was it, this or that person, right? These debates are very interesting. We can have them once the gate's open, right? Let's discuss this. I mean, Krishnamurti, of course, was trained to become the Maitreya. From the Buddhist perspective, the Messiah is called Maitreya. He's going to usher in this new era, and he's the second Buddha after Gautama, and will bring in a whole new teaching, which is linked to love and compassion. Maitreya comes from the same root as Mithras and Metta, and its root is that of friendship, and the underlying source of the concept is compassion and love. Maitreya is the Buddha of love. Gautama emphasized suffering. It was a necessary message. Gautama was a very, very wise teacher who was trying to get mankind out of the burning building. What Maitreya, it is said by Buddhists, will emphasize is more the positive message, not how to solve suffering, but how to create love, how to create conditions of beauty and friendship on the planet. Now, if we could find that as a planet, we'd solve our problems, economic problems, peace problems. Wars and violence would disappear because they'd be friends, the combatants. Domestic struggles, power struggles, political struggles. All the problems would go if we could find that key to friendship, and in its higher degree we can call that love. I think that's what Christ was talking about with agape, the concept of spiritual love. And it's what Christianity tries to embody at its best. So from a Buddhist perspective, the Golden Gate's reopening would simply symbolise an awareness and a willingness to embrace that Maitrayanic era in the planet, that we should move beyond the emphasis on suffering and say we need some good news now about how we find mercy and compassion and karuna, as Buddhists call it. Now, we can argue about who the Maitreya is. I mean, that's a pointless and ridiculous discussion, really, because in Buddhist metaphysics, we're all interconnected. Everything is a mirror of everything else, like Indra's net. And we know this from technology. We're all literally in each other's living rooms now. We can send an email all around the world in the speed of light. And now, this couple of weeks ago, scientists have discovered that some particles travel faster than light. I think Buddhists have known this all along. Meditation, prayer, consciousness travels faster than light. From a Buddhist perspective, theologically, consciousness itself is the messianic state of being. It's our Buddha nature that is that Messiah point within all of us, potentially. And that was Krishnamurti's point. I went to one of his last talks at Brockwood Park before he died. Great man. And he emphasised again and again and again, we are the Buddha, within us all. But that is the state of Buddha consciousness, Buddha mind, which is the absolute unknowingness of separate knowledges, and it's moving from a particle concept of knowledge to a wave experience of knowledge, where knowledge is like an energy field, and that's the wisdom energy, which is Buddha nature. Now, when we get to there collectively as a planet, we get planetary enlightenment, right? And that's what Buddhism actually wants and has been arguing for. It's called Metta Mahayana or Mahayana, wisdom path. Well, that's exactly the same as what the Christians are saying. The Christians have exactly the same thing theologically, and there's some wonderful research on the links between Buddhist and Christian theology. My saint name, Thomas, Thomas went to India. There were links between the early Christian Gnostics and the Buddhists. I think it's the same project to get the planet moved on to a place of universal compassion. The fact that Christ came in, whether Christ himself in his historical incarnation as Jesus of Nazareth, whether he came in through that gate is still not known by Christian scholars, but certainly he was opening for mankind the path of love and compassion and mercy. And the fact that then his crucifixion took place, I think, is a symbol of the clash between the two forces, if you want, Ahriman and Ahura Mazda, but the force of fear. I mean, obviously he was crucified, the authorities are afraid of so much wisdom getting out to the people. And he was someone who was rocking the boat of the establishment and breaking the rules. He was healing people on the Sabbath and so on. I think the point is where Christ was coming from was a place of spiritual freedom which transcended, the written law. And this is the thing St. Paul realised in that flash on the way to Damascus. That's what we as a planet need to remember, that, you see, one of the problems of the internet age and the cyber world and the financial meltdown that's going on is René Guénon said presciently in a book published in the 50s called The Reign of Quantity, that mankind is suffering from like a deluge of numbers. We're being swamped, and our spirits are beyond numbering. Arithmy, number, is the source, the arche. But that's just a language. The actual source transcends number. It's sublimated beyond number. It comes out of numbering. And Guénon was afraid that we in the West, particularly the scientistic age, have elevated quantity to be our God, and we've forgotten quality. So now we all know our numbers, our PIN numbers, our key numbers, our this, that and the other numbers, our bank numbers, our login numbers, our password numbers, but we've forgotten our identity, we've forgotten our souls. That's what Guénon said, and it's happening worse than Guénon could have even dreamt of. We've now become terrified of our numbers. My bank balance has just slipped into debt. God, I'm paying X interest rates. And the whole financial system, the banking system, is based around this terrifying grip that mankind is, under number. What I'm saying is that we need to be set free from that. And that can only be done through a reassertion of our spiritual identity and our quality as human beings, and our identity as soul beings. And for that we have to embrace one another in friendship, across all the faith barriers, across all the spiritual barriers that are getting in the way of that. And, this is a very ancient struggle, because what I'm talking about goes back to also the primal traditions of mankind. You see, the elders of this planet, the shamans, the ancient seers, the druids, the elders of the pagan parts, which were here from 60,000 BC and earlier. There's cave paintings in South Africa that are now 70,000 years old. It's a simulacra of a snake. We know there's been continual ritual worship in that cave since then. That numinous experience of our elders, that's what got the planet to where we are now. Okay, this is long before cities, long before gates and walls and houses. We lived in nature. We were sensitive to the trees. We could hear the language of the spirits. And we invented everything that's still worth doing. That's when we invented love. We invented language, which is what I'm using. We invented poetry and music and dance, all the kind of ancient wisdom that's embodied in these early religions. From a pagan perspective, the Golden Gate Project, about ushering in like a messianic time, is actually just going back to primal time. There's nothing very exciting here. I mean, the primal wisdom holders, the real seers and shamans of the pagan path, have always been in that time, cosmic time. It's those who've fallen into urban time and numbered time that have slipped out of harmony with the cosmic energies that are so infinite that you can't number them. And this was the insight David had, bless him, the king of Israel, when he realised that by trying to number the souls of Israel, he'd committed a sin. It's a wonderful passage in the Bible when David is shown that was his sin, to try and number the faithful. Because true faith is beyond number. We'll only get this golden gate open if faith develops on this planet. Religious studies experts and educators talk about the notion of faith development. I teach religious studies professionally, and what is faith development? How can we as a planet have our faith development worked on? That's a big point, a crucial question. Faith and reason are parallel, but faith transcends reason. It moves into spheres of the unknowable and the unknown that the logical, purely rational mind has to struggle to keep up with. There's so much positive energy around this possibility of reopening this gate. I think it should be done with decorum and with permission of the authorities, and with full conscious understanding of the significance of this, right? Now, where it is located is like a flashpoint on the world, geopolitically. It's on the eastern side of Jerusalem, in the area that may become part of the Palestinian state if and when they declare or get recognition as an independent state. And I think all the bodies should be involved in negotiations leading up to its opening. Now that includes the Israeli government, which is a democratically elected government. The current ruling party would have to support this project, its prime minister. It would have to see that it's good for Israel, actually. It would be good for the tourist industry. It would get rid of Israel's image as a warmongering nation, as a nation that doesn't care about spiritual matters outside the boundaries of a narrowly defined Judaism. So I've been talking to people in modern day Israel, young people and old people alike, and everybody I've spoken to about this idea thinks it's a brilliant idea. Israel wants to live in peace with its neighbours. It wants to have a better image projected in the world. And it wants to live in peace and love. And what I've experienced in Israel is there a tremendous upsurge of a new generation of young Israelis that are fed up with the old status quo of war and suffering. And they want to move on. It's a new generation. And they're the people out on the streets of Tel Aviv. They're the people doing these demonstrations for social justice and change. And those are the people that I think would support this Golden Gate project. And I have great faith in their wisdom and courage. And the whole thing has been done non-violently. These are loving people coming from a new perspective into politics and into simply being together on the planet. So I think the Israeli people and the government and whichever party, I think this is not a threat, this project. However, it would have to be done with the agreement of the Israeli military, because obviously nutters are going to try and smuggle in weapons and blow it up. You might get dissident Jewish groups. Now, so you'd obviously have to have security clearance at the gate. There'd have to be very strict screening, like airport security. And I'm proposing that before you can even get in, you have to have signed a declaration of non-violence, like online, an internet thing, with your passport, with your photo, with your ID, with your documentation and so on, and actually make a formal pledge that you will not engage in acts of violence against Muslims, Christians or Jews anywhere in the world. Now that's a big thing to ask of people, it's a big ask, but I don't think you get in the gate until you're prepared to do that. Now, what about serving officers in armed forces? Are you saying they can't come in the gate? Because people that are serving in armed forces may have to kill people of those three religions. I think fine, they can also sign the pledge, but put a caveat. Actually, I'm an officer in the Jordanian army or the British army or the Jewish Defence Force, and in the line of duty I might not be able to uphold that, fine. I don't think exclude them, but do make them sign the pledge with that caveat. So I think security would be very tight and it would have to be discussed and agreed, sadly, in today's world. The other body that would have to agree and approve this project, of course, is the ruling council, the Islamic council that control the Temple Mount in the heart of Old Jerusalem there, which is a body called the Waqf. Now the Waqf have been in existence since about 1189, in continual existence as a ruling governing body since Saladin liberated Jerusalem from the Crusaders. And the Waqf are Sunni in orientation, they're knowledgeable and learned people. I would love to begin a dialogue and engage in dialogue with them, and to try and suggest to them, theologically there are very good grounds for opening that gate. For many, many centuries it was open, and we could do some research into what were the conditions of entry in those days. From about 1200 up till 1560 it was open. It was shut by the Ottoman Sultan, 1516 I think. So from the Sunni perspective, as I've said, the understanding is that through that gate comes Muhammad and Jesus and the millennium, the last judgment. Islam is about peace and about submission to the will of God. It's about reading the signs so we know how to submit. It's about learning and about scholarship and about science. I've taught in Islamic institutions. I've studied at the feet of Islamic scholars and Sufi saints, living saints. And I know enough about Islamic faith to know that in its heart, it wants the world to move to a place of compassion and mercy. That was the goal of Muhammad's message and his whole entire teaching. I'm recording currently a commentary on the Quran where I'm trying to explain this, surah by surah, line by line. My understanding as a transpersonal historian, actually what those verses and revelations mean. By opening the gate, we're saying let's move the planetary conversation on, let true Islam come forth. Pilgrims would come to that place from all over the planet, true Muslims. It would be an honour to come and stand there, to pray in the Dome of the Rock, and the mosque there, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And any true Muslim worth their salt, I would say, would support this project, and I'm appealing to my Muslim brothers and sisters to do so, in the name of advancing peace. Because tragically, Islam has got a bad reputation with the kind of false teachings, false ideology of so-called Al-Qaeda groups, which seem to think that you can advance God's kingdom by suicide and martyrdom operations. I don't agree with that at all. Theologically, it's totally false. Muhammad was against suicide because life is a gift from God. We should love it. And he was also against not killing innocents. Muhammad and Ali, many times, refused to kill innocents, even in any situation, under any condition. It's an unconditional rule within Islam. You don't kill women and children and non-combatants. And yet by suicide bombing, you're breaking two of the fundamentals of Islamic teaching. You're killing yourself and you're killing innocents. So whoever thought that was justified within Islam needs a bit of education. I'm talking about planetary education here. And feel free to argue your case, but I think your time has come. And instead of doing martyrdom operations, what we should be doing is witness operations. The word martyr in Greek means to witness, and it means to see and to observe and to stand witness from God. The notion behind, say, being a Jehovah's Witness is you're a witness from God, right? Now all Christians, all Muslims and all Jews should be witnesses from God. What does that mean? It means we witness everything we do from the highest place of wisdom that we're capable of. We let God's higher wisdom shine through our actions in everything. And there's nothing in there about killing and destroying one another. The way that meaning slipped in falsely was because people that took that view of witnessing from the divine, tragically, because paganism had fallen into a certain bad, it had become corrupt under the Roman Empire and so on, they were being killed for their faith. And in the early years of the Christian faith, many of these amazing people, the saints, like Peter and Paul and so on, were actually killed by the authorities for just trying to witness from the perspective of God, just as Stephen had been and so on. So sadly, it became tinged with death. It meant that by witnessing to God, you immediately got killed off. Well, that's got to stop. You know, there's no point in continuing that ridiculous misthinking. And the only way out of it is to truly reclaim what it means to be a witness from that notion of killing or being killed to one of loving and giving life, because that's what a true witness should do. And that's what the Golden Gate Project is at its best. It's an attempt for mankind to bear witness to the immensity of God's imponderableness. Yeah, I mean, what is God? Theology is the study of God. What is God? God is a mystery. The Kabbalah attempts to explain the 10 Sephiroth, 10 qualities of God. The Sufi tradition talks about the 99 names of the beloved, compassion, you know, the Redeemer, these wonderful names of God. They're all attempts to understand it. Within Christian theology, Dionysius the Areopagite talks about the divine names. In Buddhism, the absolute, the unconditioned, is the place of absolute freedom. It's nirvana. It's the place where all thought comes from, where all will and all inspiration and all aspiration come from. It's the eternal Buddha field, if you want, in which we're swimming around like little minnows. And that would be the God field that we're all in. Now, modern physics, I'm very interested in modern science, and I'd like to suggest the scientific community should get involved with the Golden Gate Project, because it's a scientific suggestion. Just as, say, at CERN, these experiments, they have to line up, I've talked to physicists involved with CERN, they have to line up these incredible shooting of energy particles at great distance for going round and round the ground under Geneva. So, in a sense, by opening up the Golden Gate, we're opening up the God particle, if you want. The head of CERN went to talk to the Pope recently about this, which is the human psyche. You know, when Jung was asked what is God, he said it's the psyche. It's the unconscious and the conscious and the superconscious, as Assagioli talks about. It's the entire world of our soul nature and each other's soul natures and the collective soul nature and the super collective soul nature. It needs purifying. You know, we need to work on healing this planet. There's too much poverty, there's too much grief, there's too much insecurity. And I'm not saying all the problems of the world will be solved if we open up the gate. I'm on the contrary. But it gives us a little breathing space, a window of grace, a window of light. The other thing I'm suggesting is that, as well as opening up the gate, we put a little peace tent on the mountain there in the middle of Jerusalem. And like a peace tent where people can go. The pilgrims have got somewhere to go in and out of the sun. There's refreshments there, facilities for sitting, maybe some meditation spaces, and just for networking and meeting fellow pilgrims from all over the planet to talk about peace. It could be a venue for actual peace meetings that are going on. You know, it would seat maybe, I don't know, 500 people, like a big marquee, and it would be a venue where people could, having gone on pilgrimage, coming in through the Golden Gate, you know, they've spent, some of them might want to walk. I have a friend who's suggesting little pilgrim groups might want to walk there. I think that's a fantastic idea. I think there'd have to be a prayer space in that peace tent, meditation and prayer space, ecumenical, interfaith, open to all paths. And it would be just a symbol for mankind, so the conversation can begin. How we're going to heal this planet. I mean, presidents could come in the gate, monarchs could come in, bishops, archbishops, cardinals, you know, everybody can come in there and spend a few hours sitting in the peace tent. You never know who you'd meet. I think it would be a beautiful gesture for the world. The other body that would have to give permission and authority to this is, of course, the Palestinian authorities. The Palestinian people are trying to get an independent state there in the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. Now, whether they'd actually, the borders are still under negotiation. Nobody knows where the borders of Palestine will be. Would it include part of this region, the Mount of Olives, which is opposite the Golden Gate, or not? That's up for discussion by politicians. I'm not interested in that. What I'm saying is that if we open up the gate, if we got our peace tent for negotiations, it's more likely to move that project on. And it could be open either at the same time as the Palestinian state was declared independent, or prior to it, as a precondition for making the talks possible that can lead to an independent Palestine. So I think the Palestinian authorities would have to very much be involved in these discussions leading up to the opening of the gate and give their approval as a rational peace project. And I know there was, for instance, a peace tent where Palestinian people were doing poetry and things just down in Silwan, just down from the Golden Gate area in East Jerusalem. I'm coming to the end of this brief exploration of the theology underlying the Golden Gate project. I just want to say a bit about the role of interfaith leaders and religious leaders, because obviously it's a religious site, and this is a religious project I'm proposing, which has huge implications for the world as a whole and for mankind as a whole, non-religious as well. But I think the actual vision, let me explain the actual vision, is that we open the gate with the agreement of the authorities, the Waqf, custodians of the site, the official body of the Israeli government that deals with religious sites, and their equivalent counterparts in the Palestinian Authority would have to agree with this. So there'd be lots of negotiations to take place. I would also suggest that the Israeli army, Palestinian police force should be equally responsible for security on the gate. So you'd have a Palestinian and an Israeli police officer or military there to ensure nobody gets in that's going to cause trouble. And likewise with the screening security checks to be done before people can even get up to the gate. So you'd already have your ticket, which you could only get once you've submitted an entry form and all your security's been checked, your passport and so on. There might be a small fee, okay, just because there's a lot of effort going to be required to do all that processing. So what actually happens? Well, I'm suggesting that on the very first day when it's opened, that the world's interfaith leaders come in procession. Because this is a historic day for mankind. This would be really good news. It's better than the Olympic Games, it's better than the royal wedding, it's really good news. What would happen is the world's inter-religious leaders would come in, and the gate's fairly wide, you can have like a batch of 10 arm in arm, so nobody's having priority. It's not like the Muslim comes in first, or the Jew, or the Christian, or whatever. It's like we, the people, we the religious leaders of the world, are saying, well, we're going to do this for mankind, yeah? So in your first row you have your main religions, obviously Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, the big 10. And then back from that you have your next religions and so on. Sikhs and Hindus, front row, I'd say. So the world's interfaith community, the religious leaders of the planet, could send their representatives. Now some might want to come in person. If I was the Pope, I'd want to be there in the front row myself. Benedict might like this idea. If I was the Christian Orthodox leader, Patriarch Bartholomew from Istanbul, I'd want to be there. Or the chief rabbi of this or that, or the chief imam. Now, you can have a very big procession, and there's an awful lot of wonderful, extraordinary religious leaders on the planet at the moment, and they're all welcome to this, subject to getting a ticket and the security clearances. But then open the gates and let them come in, is what I'd say. And the image I've got is that wonderful march where Martin Luther King was walking for peace with rabbis and others, and he's arm in arm with 10 abreast, as used to happen on the old CND marches to Aldermaston. So that's the thought in my mind, is let the world's interreligious leaders come in there, together in a solemn and ordered procession. And then, of course, the peace tent's there. They can sit down there, you know, do some prayers together, have a coffee, have a long chat about the state of the world and politics and God and the nature of ultimate reality and just the fellowship thing. You know, in the Christian world, there's these sorts of things happen a lot. I've just been on Iona, the little island community, and the Iona Fellowship meet there. There's a beautiful energy and atmosphere of spiritual focus, and I imagine it will be the same but magnified, you know, many, many thousands of times. I just want to say what gave me this vision is partly my work as an interfaith leader in the United Kingdom. It was my privilege in the 1990s to serve as Secretary General for the World Conference on Religion and Peace. Now that's the largest interfaith peace group on the planet. It's got offices at UN Plaza opposite the UN headquarter building. And it took me as Secretary General to many interreligious conferences around the planet. I went to Sweden, to Venice, to Paris, to Rome in 1995 to an interreligious leaders conference. There were 900 of us, and the previous Pope was hosting us, basically, John Paul II, and I was mingling with archbishops and cardinals and chief rabbis and imams and Buddhist elders and Nobel Peace Prize winners and Gandhi's granddaughter, and you name it, they were there. And it was one of the most moving experiences I've ever had. I remember sitting in the College of Cardinals, being moved to tears by the presentation, audio-visual presentation of wars that are taking place on the planet and sufferings. And there was an extraordinarily beautiful soprano singing in the back of the hall. And I think all of us were moved to tears. And, you know, we swore basically to each other we would work tirelessly from then on to try and advance the conditions of peace on this planet through spirituality. You know, that's the only weapon we have as authentic religious leaders. We don't, unless you've gone crazy, you don't reach for the bomb or the bullet. You know, you reach for your sacred text, your faith, and your educational abilities. That's all we have. You know, that's all Christ was, or Muhammad, or Buddha. They're all teachers. They're planetary teachers, but at the end of the day, they're all involved in the same project of planetary education. So really, I'm just saying, let's open up the gate. It's my way of also giving back because of the tremendous privilege I've had as an interfaith leader, mingling with these incredible people. And I also would like the interfaith institutions of the planet, like the World Conference on Religion and Peace, like the World Congress of Faiths, like United Religions, set up by Bishop Spong, Bishop of San Francisco, and the other interfaith, like the World Parliament of Religions that's met in Melbourne recently, and I was invited but couldn't go, and there are other similar kinds of projects getting together religious leaders. They're wonderful. I've met most of the people involved at different levels during my time of service. But what I'm saying is the Golden Gate would give us a focus if we could reopen that, because the interfaith community is scattered and fragmented. It doesn't really have a basis. It doesn't have tragically, it doesn't have credibility in the eyes of so-called mainstream religious leaders, sometimes. And by having the Golden Gate open and the peace tent there, it would be like a call for mankind. Let's embrace this dialogue of pluralities that Hans Kuhn talks about, this dialogue between the religions. It would be a venue. So I'd like to see the support of the existing interfaith groups and organisations, and hopefully others will come into being. In terms of religious leaders, there are tremendous voices now rising for peace and sanity. I've just heard in London there's been a tremendous major conference of many thousands of people in Wembley just this week, September 2011. Dr. Tahir al-Qadri, who's founded an international organisation called the Minhaj al-Quran International Movement, has just been involved in a Peace for Humanity conference in Wembley, with the support of Bishop David Hawkins of Barking and many other religious leaders, Sikh, Hindu and so on. And basically what Dr. al-Qadri is saying as a Muslim is exactly what I've been saying, that that true Islam is nowhere near terrorism. It's nothing to do with violence. Yes, a Muslim has a right for self-defense in extremis, and if you're attacked, it's common sense. But you go out of your way to resolve the conflicts through prayer, through spirituality, through reason. That's true Islam. And so someone like him would be the kind of person I'd imagine would want to come and participate in this Golden Gate project. I also want to say something about the status and role of women on the planet. Women, it was said by Gandhi, are the future of humanity. And in a sense represent the mercy, the gate of mercy is in a sense the feminine domain. And if we're going to survive as a species, the status and creativity of women has to come to the fore again on the planet. And that means acknowledging the wonder of the polarity between male and female. That's the dance of life. And there's a lot of teachings in all the traditions about the lust Shekinah, the glory of the hidden goddess, if you want, in Kabbalah, in Sufism and so on. It's time for that goddess to come back into her power, and for women and men to stand shoulder to shoulder. The soul is beyond gender, and it includes and transcends, and so does the nature of God. Now, Hinduism has some interesting light to shed on this, and I've worked with Hindus and yogic teachers for many years, because although Hinduism embraces God and goddess, male and female, aspects of divinity, they also believe in the absolute, the one, the Vedanta point, the place of absolute Brahma. And that spiritual nature is really what I'm talking about with the messianic consciousness. Now that's neither a male nor a female thing. It's when male and female work together in harmony and love. Okay, so that's the mission for mankind. It's a big job to reach peace between the sexes and reconciliation, so that crimes of passion, violence, emotional violence, and all the kind of domestic abuse and so on, that has to go too. We're not just talking about ordinary wars here, we're talking about non-violence across the sphere of human relationships. And it's a big job. The opening of the Golden Gate and the beginning of that conversation is just a symbolic attempt to start that. And let the theologians and mystics and saints of the planet, the living saints, come forward and contribute to that dialogue. I've done a dictionary of universal saints and sages from the past as a scholar of religious history. I've got 365 days of the year with 12 columns, one of which is all the women thinkers and mystics of the planet. But there's columns for Sikhism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and so on, Jainism, and all the other great religions. But those guys are all dead. Yeah, I'm talking about now we need to compile a living one. Who are the 365 most enlightened Hindu sages on the planet at the moment? Who are the 365 most enlightened Christian saints and sages on the planet? Who are the 365 most important pagan saints and sages on the planet? And so on for each of the faiths. Those are the guys that I'm inviting to get involved with this project. You know who you are. I don't. I've met some of you. I know there are at least probably 10 or 100 times that number. But let's at least get, the key ones to turn up. Now's the time to stand up and be counted. Okay, the timing. Why now? Well, this came out of a conference I went to in Israel in April 2011 on the nature of 2012 and its significance esoterically. This was attended by light workers from all over the planet, some extraordinary beings. And of course, 2012, December the 21st, is the end of the Mayan long count. It's the end of a huge cycle of time in the ancient Mayan calendar from the ancient American Indian cultures of Mayan people. Now, I think that that's a very good date to choose for this symbolic reopening, if we can do it in time. That only gives us just a bit over a year from this day, which is Rosh Hashanah, 29th of September 2011. It might not be possible to do it in time, in which case the gate will open when all the final bits of paperwork are sorted. But it would be nice to get at least a symbolic reopening, even for a couple of days, on that day, Why? Because it's a day that's important to primal traditions, to the Mayan peoples, and to the pagan peoples of the planet. And they're often the forgotten ones, the marginalised, the little people. They're the Australian Aborigines, or the Maoris, or the black African animists, or the ancient shamans of Mongolia and so on. And often the big religious leaders don't take them seriously or don't even really care about them. In the American Indian culture, they were often hunted to death and killed, evangelised and so on. So I think mankind owes a certain debt to the pagan traditions of the planet. This is one of the reasons I've worked a lot with the Druid community in Britain, being responsible and involved with projects about opening Stonehenge for the public at the winter solstice and the summer solstice. And I'm currently the Archdruid of the British Peace Druids, so I'm saying this as a Druid elder, this project. I'd love to come in that procession of religious leaders, but I'm very happy to come in right at the end. I'm merely a Druid, okay, not a big religion. There's only a few thousand of us. But we do speak for that ancient primal wisdom of the planet in the Celtic world. And just as, it's an ancient tradition, and out of solidarity with the Mayan priests and elders who are saying mankind needs to go through this fulcrum, this turning point on December the 21st, 2012. It can be a time of great positive energy change. So I'm saying if we had that symbolic reopening of the gate on that day, wouldn't that be an extraordinary turning point? Because it's the point of maximum darkness, and then we go back into the light. In the Druid tradition, we talk about the time of Mabon. It's when the Son of God is reborn. It's the Mabon moment. And we sure need that as a planet. Okay. I do believe, I just want to finish by saying that I do believe in the power of prayer, the power of spiritual witness. You can help this project through your own, carry on with your own prayer practice, whatever you do, whether you're a Buddhist, a Hindu, a Druid, a Christian, a Muslim. Do it better and include a little prayer blessing for the Golden Gate. We're doing full moon meditations here up in Loch Goil at the Castle of the Muses, and I know there's a sister group in Israel and elsewhere, Egypt. Start a little full moon meditation group and pray for this project, and come and visit the Castle of the Muses if you can. We can meet and talk about this project in person, and I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to contact me. There's a lot of work to be done, and it will be done in the good time of that Buddha nature that's in charge of all of us, that messianic consciousness that we're all part of. We're all working on this project together, and so let's complete and fulfill it together. Okay, thank you so much for listening.